Welcome to our channel. Today we uncover the extraordinary life and controversial legacy of Hollywood legend Tony Curtis. From his humble beginnings in the Bronx to his rise as one of the most sought-after leading men of his time, Curtis lived a life filled with glamour, scandal, and unforgettable performances. But behind the charm and iconic roles, there was a whirlwind of personal struggles, broken relationships, and shocking revelations. Join us as we dive into the highs and lows of Tony Curtis's life and discover the truth about his final days. The boy who would later charm millions was born as Bernard Schwartz in 1925. His parents were Hungarian Jewish immigrants, struggling to make ends meet in the Bronx. If you picture a tailor shop, threadbare, crowded, a single light bulb swinging overhead, you can almost imagine the environment where baby Bernard spent his earliest days. He and his siblings had so little that, at one point when money completely dried up, his parents had no choice but to place them in an orphanage for a month. Can you imagine being shipped away as a child simply because your mother and father could not afford to feed you? For Bernard, this experience left a scar that would influence him all his life. Bernard's mother showed signs of severe mental health issues that only worsened over time. He would later claim that she beat him and his brothers mercilessly during her unpredictable spells. Eventually, doctors diagnosed her with schizophrenia, an illness poorly understood and often improperly treated in those days. No sooner did the family try to adjust to her breakdown than Bernard's brother Robert faced the same illness, plunging the household deeper into crisis. It might have seemed that every door was closing before young Bernard's eyes, that the gloom of hardship would be his lifelong companion. Bernard found his escape in daydreams. He immersed himself in fantasies of bigger, brighter futures, hoping that one day he could outrun the Bronx's suffocating grip. He took on odd jobs, one of which was driving a truck, all to scrape together enough money for acting classes. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, fate brought him a golden chance. A talent agent spotted him and recognized that beneath Bernard's scruffy exterior there was something mesmerizing, perhaps the eyes or the magnetism of his smile. That agent happened to be the niece of David O. Selznick, the storied producer of Gone with the Wind. Hollywood in the late 1940s loomed as a realm of star-making machinery, and as soon as Bernard Schwartz arrived, the machinery went to work. He changed his name to Anthony Curtis, though in time the world would know him simply as Tony. David O. Selznick arranged a contract for him at Universal. The studio gave him small roles, paired him with riding instructors and fencing coaches, and basically molded him into a budding idol. Curtis's own goals were modest in those early days. He freely admitted he wanted to earn some money and catch the attention of pretty women. Nothing too grand. Yet within a few years, he would eclipse those small ambitions and find himself center stage in some of Hollywood's brightest lights. Even before he became a household name, Tony Curtis had an intriguing brush with destiny. Long before filming Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe, he actually dated her when both were nobodies in a town that thrives on star power. They shared beach barbecues, sun-drenched afternoons, and the camaraderie of young dreamers trying to find a foothold in the industry. Though they drifted apart soon after, that connection would come roaring back in the strangest way years later, fueling rumors, resentments, and jaw-dropping on-set feuds. But in the moment, it was all casual and carefree, perhaps the only period in his entire life that felt uncomplicated. Janet Leigh, poised and luminous, had scored her own share of hits, including that famously terrifying shower scene in Hitchcock's Psycho. She was one of Hollywood's crown jewels, exuding sophistication that was miles away from the Bronx streets Tony Curtis had known. And yet when they met, there was an instant spark. They became the it couple, the kind of duo that gossip columnists drooled over. Tony and Janet, both young, both good-looking, both aiming to be Hollywood's next golden pair. It seemed like a fairy tale waiting to happen, but their path to the altar had a significant obstacle: Universal. You might wonder why a studio would stand in the way of true love. In old Hollywood, image was everything. Curtis, with his thick hair and bedroom eyes, was being groomed as a heartthrob. The execs wanted him to pair off with Piper Laurie, who often played Curtis's on-screen love interest, so the studio could market them as a real-life super couple. They threatened him with dire consequences if he defied their plan. Sending him back to the Bronx was mentioned more than once. Yet Tony and Janet were undeterred. They snuck off to Connecticut in 1951, staged a tiny secret ceremony, and then headed back to face the music. The public adored them as a real-life couple, and far from damaging Tony's popularity, it shot him higher in the celebrity stratosphere. But hidden cracks were already forming in their union, and Tony's restlessness would soon chip away at the marriage he'd fought so hard to have. In 1959, Tony Curtis secured the role that would define his comedic talents for generations. Some Like It Hot. This Billy Wilder classic features Curtis and Jack Lemmon dressing in drag to evade mobsters, while Marilyn Monroe plays the chaotic blonde bombshell who befriends them. The film became a phenomenon, lauded for its daring humor and witty script. But behind that joyous, chaotic vibe on screen, the set was a hotbed of tension, much of it fueled by Monroe's precarious emotional state. She was known to show up late, suffer anxiety attacks, or simply lock herself in her trailer, leaving cast and crew exasperated. Tony's earlier friendship with Monroe deteriorated under the weight of her unpredictability. He famously quipped that kissing Monroe on camera was like kissing Hitler, a bitter jab that indicated just how sour their relationship had turned. Decades later, however, he would write about their on-set affair in a manner that contradicted these harsh words, leaving fans guessing which version of events was actually true. While Some Like It Hot soared, Curtis's personal life with Janet Leigh started to plummet. Various reports suggest that Leigh felt superior to her husband, regarding him as unpolished or ill-mannered. More than once, she supposedly bristled at his faux pas in front of Hollywood bigwigs. Meanwhile, Tony was amassing a notorious reputation as a serial flirt. Rumors flew about him at the Playboy Mansion, hooking up with the young starlet Natalie Wood and falling hard for co-star Gloria DeHaven. He apparently juggled these dalliances all while going home each night to Janet. You might think that would be enough cause for a marital blow-up, but ironically, the straw that really broke the marriage's back was Tony's jealousy. Although he himself was gallivanting around, he became convinced Janet was the one cheating. Some accounts say he phoned her incessantly to check on her whereabouts. He suspected she was having a fling with Frank Sinatra. She wasn't, at least not initially, but Tony's accusations and distrust eventually wore her down. By the time the two parted ways, in 1962, the overall sense was that their marriage had fallen victim to Tony's relentless cheating, combined with his paranoid illusions that Janet was giving him a taste of his own medicine. Fresh off the heartbreak of that divorce, Curtis found himself cast in Spartacus, a massive swords and sandals epic starring Kirk Douglas and Laurence Olivier. Though overshadowed by Some Like It Hot in the public mind, Spartacus holds a place in film history for several reasons, not the least of which was a scene strongly implying a mutual attraction between Curtis's character and Olivier's. For 1960 audiences, this subtext verged on scandalous. Studio executives fretted that the censors would never allow it. In fact, they expected to scrap it entirely, which is why they didn't even record the sound for the footage. Curtis and Olivier, however, pushed for the scene to be included. Ultimately, the scene was dropped in the original release, only to be restored decades later. Curtis would eventually redub his lines when a new version came out, while Anthony Hopkins famously supplied the voice for the deceased Olivier. This edgy tidbit hinted at Curtis's willingness to take creative risks, even as tabloids labeled him a playboy or a comedic lightweight. Shortly after finalizing his split from Janet, Curtis wasted no time in heading to the altar again. In 1963, he married Christine Kaufman, his teenage co-star from Terrace Bulba. Tony was 38, Kaufman was 17. In the public eye, the glamorous allure he once held when married to Janet Leigh evaporated. He appeared less like a suave leading man and more like an older star clinging to youthful romance. Film audiences began to sour on him. The comedic roles that once seemed so breezy and fun now felt stale. Meanwhile, the dramas that had once offered a showcase for his talent no longer came his way. His star power began a noticeable decline. Still, he wasn't about to give up. He sought redemption by taking a darkly dramatic turn in 1968's The Boston Strangler, playing real-life serial killer Albert DeSalvo. Critics praised him for the unsettling intensity he brought to the role, a performance that stood in stark contrast to his comedic persona. This move suggested Tony Curtis could still muster the raw talent that had first propelled him to fame. However, success in film didn't translate to happiness in his personal life. By the time he'd revived his career, his personal demons were dragging him down faster than ever. He moved on from Christine Kaufman to Leslie Allen, a woman 20 years his junior. He married her mere days after divorcing Kaufman. Even that union was fraught. Kaufman retreated to Germany and took their two daughters, Alexandra and Allegra. Tony, unwilling to let them go, orchestrated a plan to bring them back to the United States without her permission. Initially, Kaufman, possibly fatigued by battles with her ex, allowed the girls to remain with their father. But soon, she grew alarmed by the life they were apparently living. Tony's new marriage was marred by his intensifying drug use, while Leslie allegedly drank heavily. Now, he was a middle-aged star swirling in addiction. He parted ways with Leslie Allen, pursued rehab at the Betty Ford Center, and tried to resurrect the stable Tony Curtis that once existed. He cut out the pills and alcohol, claiming sobriety as a new mission. Yet there was one addiction he refused to relinquish, the compulsion to marry. Thus began a string of unions that would baffle fans who once admired him for seeming so charming and confident. He married Andrea Savio, an actress who was barely in her 20s while he was pushing 60. When that union fizzled, he leapt toward a new relationship with Lisa Deutsch, a lawyer. Surely that would bring more stability, right? It didn't. 18 months later, they divorced as well. Around this time, tragedy struck in a way no parent should ever have to face. Tony's son, from an earlier marriage, Nicholas, lost his life to drugs at just 23 years old. Curtis would later call it the greatest heartbreak he ever endured. He had soared to unimaginable heights in film, but behind the scenes, fatherhood had proven heartbreakingly fragile. His daughter, Jamie Lee Curtis, then a blossoming star in her own right thanks to horror classics like Halloween, would later reveal a dark secret. She and her father had shared illicit substances. Both father and daughter eventually got sober, but Tony carried the weight of knowing he had once facilitated a destructive path for Jamie Lee. Curtis's sixth marriage was to Jill Vandenberg, a woman who was 46 years younger than he was, less than half the age of Jamie Lee. By that point, critics rolled their eyes, believing it was yet another doomed May-December relationship. But Jill shared some of Tony's passions, particularly a love of horses, and they opened a refuge for abused and neglected animals. Meanwhile, Tony's career took a left turn as he dabbled in painting, an art form he'd enjoyed for years but never spotlighted. His works garnered attention, even from major institutions such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which showcased his painting, The Red Table. There was also an old piece of cinematic business he wanted to finish, that famous Spartacus bath scene with Laurence Olivier. He'd lobbied for decades to restore it with complete audio, and finally, in the early 1990s, the scene emerged in a definitive cut. Curtis re-recorded his old lines while an impersonator stepped in for Olivier's voice. This segment became recognized as a milestone in queer cinematic subtext, though ironically Tony spent much of his life insisting he was 100% straight. Despite the calmer tone of his final years, Tony still knew how to grab headlines. Just before his death, he published a memoir titled The Making of Some Like It Hot, in which he dropped a bombshell. He claimed he'd rekindled an affair with Marilyn Monroe during filming, that she'd become pregnant with his child, and that she miscarried. The press devoured this sensational story, though many questioned its validity. Over the years, Tony's narrative of Monroe had changed repeatedly. Had they shared a fleeting fling? Were they bitter rivals? Did he truly call her Hitler behind the scenes? Or did she confess to her husband, Arthur Miller, that Tony was the father of a baby she lost? Skeptics abounded, but for Tony, stirring the pot seemed second nature. Eventually, in his 80s, Tony Curtis was frail, slowed by illness, yet still hungry for a bit of that star magic. In one poignant moment, a photographer arrived at his home to do a portrait session. Curtis asked him, almost pleading, to make him look like an icon again, just one more time. The man who once commanded the screen in a glittering array of comedic and dramatic roles had grown old, and it clearly weighed on him that the illusions of youth were gone. Not long after, in 2010, he passed away at 85. Yet even from beyond the grave, he delivered a show-stopping final twist. He had 6 children, all of whom assumed they'd inherit some portion of his multi-million-dollar estate. Instead, in a last will that he revised just 6 months before his death, Tony disinherited all of them. He left everything, an estimated $60 million, to Jill Vandenberg. Perhaps it was his ultimate expression of devotion to his final spouse, or perhaps there were darker manipulations involved. Speculation raged in the tabloids. Some believed Jill had lobbied for the new will. Others pointed to Tony's open statements that he found real happiness only with her and that he didn't want anyone else to have a piece of his life. Regardless of the truth, the children were stunned and tried to contest the will, but Jill walked away with all of it. If that weren't controversial enough, years later, actress Kim Novak surfaced with a shocking accusation. She claimed that at a 1958 party, Tony spiked her drink. According to Novak, she had only one beverage, courtesy of Tony, and woke up the next morning with no memory of what happened and no clothing on her body. The story emerged long after Tony's death, so he never responded to the claim, and Novak provided no further details. Maybe the most compelling aspect of Tony Curtis is the sheer distance he traveled in life. He started out as a hungry kid in a cramped shop in the Bronx. By all accounts, he shouldn't have become anything more than a local hustler, maybe working menial jobs to scrape by. Yet he soared into the stratosphere of movie stardom at a time when the Hollywood system loved to pick a handsome face, polish it, and turn it into a brand. He took full advantage of that transformation, from shaping his eyebrows to perfecting a sultry pout with those full lips. Audiences couldn't get enough of him, the style that would later define rock and roll. Think of Elvis Presley's famous ducktail, found part of its inspiration in Tony's coiffed hairdo. That alone shows how he influenced American culture, a subtle testament to the power of star images in shaping trends. But if Tony's looks opened doors, his complicated nature sometimes slammed them shut. He was too unbridled, too entangled in his own passions to maintain a stable life for long. Addiction and impulsivity dogged him, and though he racked up a series of well-intentioned comebacks, some more successful than others, he never quite escaped a sense of chaos. He once confided that inside he felt like the Bronx boy who got lucky, always hoping to outrun his past. Yet perhaps that restless drive was the very thing that propelled him to such highs. He always needed something new, another film, another romance, another jolt of excitement, lest he feel the emptiness creep in. Even as he aged, he clung to that romantic restlessness, cycling through marriages and insisting that real, lasting love was just around the corner. Either way, the result was the same. A series of short-lived unions culminating in a final marriage that surprised everyone by lasting until his death. And what to make of his on-again, off-again claims about Marilyn Monroe? He publicly insulted her, equating kissing her to an act of revulsion. Then he penned a memoir suggesting they shared a passionate, secret love, and that she even bore his child for a fleeting moment. Their relationship might have lurched between desire and resentment, tenderness and acrimony. Tony's passing in 2010 closed the curtain on a man who consistently fused unstoppable ambition with personal chaos. Yet the drama of his final will showed that even the grave couldn't hush him completely. The children, including Jamie Lee, reeled at the legal snub. To outsiders, it might seem unbelievably harsh. Tony, though, had never been one to abide by social norms. The same rebellious streak that led him out of the Bronx, that led him to defy his studio bosses to marry Janet Leigh, that led him to keep testing the boundaries of acceptance, was perhaps the impetus for that final act of disinheritance. Whatever one thinks of Tony Curtis, playboy, comedic genius, manipulator, star-crossed lover, or a victim of his own demons, there's no denying the impact he made on mid-20th century Hollywood. His comedic timing in Some Like It Hot stands as a masterclass in physical transformation and witty banter. Spartacus, and the rebellious way he pushed for that scandalous scene, testifies to his desire to break conventional barriers. His chilling portrayal in The Boston Strangler proved he could explore the darkest corners of human behavior with convincing intensity. And beyond all of that, his mere presence as a style icon, someone unafraid to pluck his eyebrows or maintain a refined pout, helped usher in a new aesthetic for masculine beauty that influenced generations to come. Elvis famously admitted that he copied Tony's ducktail, and if you think about how many teenage fans swooned over Elvis's hair, you might realize Tony's influence radiated far beyond the silver screen. Regardless of how one judges his choices, Tony Curtis left behind an impressive cinematic legacy, from the laugh-out-loud cross-dressing antics in Some Like It Hot to the menacing portrayal of a disturbed killer in The Boston Strangler. Many of his films still hold up today, offering glimpses of an actor who managed to be playful, mischievous, and deeply charismatic on screen. In every scene, you can sense that hungry spark, the same one that flickered in a Bronx boy's eyes as he imagined his way out of poverty. And so it goes in Hollywood legends. The bright lights reveal a polished image, but behind the scenes, storms rage. Tony Curtis's life epitomizes this dynamic, reminding us that no amount of glamour can erase personal heartbreak or mortal frailties. Sometimes the best we can do is enjoy the show, admire the artistry, and realize that each star's true story runs deeper than any script they ever memorized. Maybe that's the real moral hidden in Tony's final decisions. No matter how famous you become, no matter how many fans worship your image, you take your own secret truths with you to the grave, truths that no camera ever fully captures. Yet he did leave some glimpses for us to ponder. The rumor-laden swirl around him and Monroe, the paternal regret about Nicholas's death, and Jamie Lee's battle with addiction. The last quiet years painting canvases while wearing a cowboy hat or championing rescued horses with Jill by his side. Even the defiant will that cut out his children stands as a final flourish in a life that seemed allergic to predictability. Tony Curtis was, in many ways, an archetype of Hollywood's golden era, immensely gifted, unbelievably handsome, deeply flawed, and impossible to forget. Thus, if you find yourself watching Some Like It Hot or Spartacus again, keep an eye out for the layers behind that suave grin. You might see flickers of the Bronx boy yearning for security, or the middle-aged star grappling with a crumbling marriage, or the defiant rebel testing what the censors might let him get away with. Or maybe you'll just see a man who excelled at giving audiences a good time, whether it meant playing the clown or a cunning villain. Take from it what you will. Tony Curtis likely wouldn't have told you how to feel. He knew life was complicated and star personas even more so. He might, however, have encouraged you to chase your dreams regardless of what the naysayers think. An orphanage kid from the Bronx reaching for stardom is, after all, the stuff of improbable miracles. Sure, there were dark realities from addiction to heartbreak and back again, but that singular drive can sometimes carve out a piece of Hollywood history that endures long after the person is gone. Perhaps that's Tony Curtis's true gift to us, proof that someone can come from nothing, dazzle the world, make every imaginable mistake, and still, in the end, leave behind a body of work worthy of admiration. Maybe not a perfect legacy, but definitely a memorable one. The next time you see a photo of Tony with that sly half-smile, consider the distances he traveled, from a mother's mental illness to Academy Award ceremonies, from heartbreak and scandal to painting exhibitions, from comedic cross-dressing to battling a screen icon in a Roman bath. His story underscores that the pursuit of fame comes at a cost, but it also shows that even flawed, restless souls can spark a kind of magic that resonates decades after the final curtain. Love him or hate him, the man knew how to put on a show. And in the end, if the controversy over his last will or the possibility that he misled fans with tall tales about Monroe leaves you with questions, well, that's in keeping with Tony Curtis's modus operandi. He kept the public guessing in life, and he kept them guessing in death. What's certain is that the Hollywood he knew, full of big contracts, powerful studios, hidden affairs, and backroom deals, has largely passed away. But the spirit he represented, that of the underdog turned megastar with an appetite for risk, remains a staple of Hollywood myth. Younger generations encountering Some Like It Hot for the first time can still sense that joyful, rebellious energy that Tony channeled, crossing gender lines in a comedic masterpiece that stands among the greatest ever made. Tony Curtis's journey from a struggling boy in the Bronx to a Hollywood heartthrob is as captivating as it is complex. His charm and talent left an indelible mark on the film industry, but his personal life was a roller coaster of love, loss, and controversy. Despite it all, his legacy as an actor remains timeless. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the life of Tony Curtis, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories about the lives of Hollywood's greatest stars. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.